I'm just kind of curious as to your thought right now when you see so many people from the Republican Party that are kind of bragging about how it's the law of the jungle, like that's a good thing.
There has always been an element with President Trump that favors the application of force over negotiation, force over reason. If you go back and look at President Trump's background in the 80s and 90s especially, he's always been someone who thought that bullying and threatening was the way to achieve what you wanted in negotiations. I think some of this has to do with the New York real estate background. It's almost as though he wants people to fear him, and he presents this sort of gangster persona as a way to persuade them to fear him. Because I can tell you that President Trump is not the sort of person that if you met him and worked with him for any length of time in private, you would fear him as that sort of gangster-like figure. You know, there was an event in the early 90s where he was talking to some member of the State Department who happened to, he and this person happened to find each other. I've forgotten the circumstances. But the man said, well, Bob over here is going to be negotiating with the Russians on intermediate range nuclear weapons, something like that. And Trump was fascinated, said, oh, really? He's going to do that? And he said, well, I have some advice for him. He said, well, he's right over here. Why don't you go talk with him? So we went over there, and what was reported subsequently from the conversation was that he said, what you need to do when you see that Russian, you need to go right over to him as soon as you walk in the room before anything is said and grab him by the collar and tell him, screw you. Of course, he was less polite. He didn't use the word screw. And on the assumption that this is how you handle them, you just go right up into their faces and you push them and you tell them, screw you, I'm in charge. Well, obviously that didn't happen, and the negotiations proceeded, and we did conclude a favorable agreement. I've forgotten on which facet of arms control it was. I think that's Donald Trump, frankly, and his belief in these tactics. That's all. That's the only thing I can say.
And let's actually get into what some of those tactics and how they're manifesting right now. This whole situation with Venezuela, of course, has all been in the news. Everybody's been talking about it. We went in there, we did the snatch and grab, and a lot of people have been talking about the operation itself, and we might get into that in a minute here. But I want to focus on what has happened since and where this is going to go. Secretary Rubio yesterday went out in front of the cameras along with Secretary Hegseth, and they said basically there are two objectives of this Venezuelan ops.
As you've seen today, 2 more ships were seized. We are in the midst right now and, in fact, about to execute on a deal to take all the oil. They have oil that is stuck in Venezuela. They can't move it because of our quarantine and because it's sanctioned. We are going to take between 30 and 50 million barrels of oil. We're going to sell it in the marketplace at market rates, not at the discounts Venezuela was getting. That money will then be handled in such a way that we will control how it is dispersed in a way that benefits the Venezuelan people, not corruption, not the regime. So we have a lot of leverage to move on the stabilization front. The second phase will be a phase that we call recovery, and that is ensuring that American, Western, and other companies have access to the Venezuelan market in a way that's fair. Also, at the same time, begin to create the process of reconciliation nationally within Venezuela.
Okay, so those seem to be two kind of strange things to put together. We're going to, number one, we're going to take their oil, we're going to use it how we see fit. And then the second thing is this is nation building. We're going to start telling them how to change their terms inside and bring all this democracy into place. I mean, let's take those in order. What do you think, first of all, about what justification can we use that has any plausible international acceptance or legality to just take the oil, especially when you're talking, I'm just going to now go and get this amount of oil and we're going to spend it how we see fit and we'll let you know how it turns out?
Well, the answer to that is there is none. But I don't think it makes any difference to anybody in Washington. And we might as well come to terms with that reality. If we're going to sit around and talk about the legalistic aspects of this whole business, it's going to be a very short conversation. None of it is legal. We don't even have a declared war. In other words, there's nothing from the Hill that says, we support intervention in Venezuela and we're giving the president authorization to do it and we're backing whatever he wants. The Hill doesn't seem to care. The Hill wasn't asked. And when you start talking about dispersing funds, I'm sure all of these donors that are in the background that are lining up to pick up the pieces of whatever falls out of the basket of goodies from Venezuela will have something to say about that. So.
And now, what about the second part of it? Because do you think that when Rubio's talking about, we're going to do democracy and stuff, is that just a sop to people who say, oh, well, you don't care about the people, you just care about the oil, but we're going to get into democracy? Because that is like, we've tried that in Iraq. We've tried that in other places, and it spectacularly backfired. Do you think that the administration is actually going to try to invest capital, political capital and otherwise, into trying to reshaping Venezuela from the inside?
If all the concern about the Venezuelan people, and unfortunately, I think to some extent also the American people, but certainly the Venezuelan people, were flatulence, it wouldn't stink up a broom closet. So it's all nonsense. I wouldn't pay any attention to it at all. These people are trying to dress up whatever they say or do in clothing and language that's going to appeal to people. And you do that by invoking human rights, freedom, democracy, all the usual things. Hasn't got anything to do with it. You can go all the way back to World War I. This was the crusade for democracy in the war to end all wars. That was all nonsense. It had much more to do with the interests of the banking community and the possibility, very high probability at that point, that the British and the French would lose, and we'd lose all the money that we'd invested in them. This is nonsense. So I wouldn't pay any attention to any of it at all.
But do you think that we're going to try to do it? Because if we make some efforts, it's just not going to go well? Or do you think that it literally is just verbal and we won't actually even make an attempt to do it, and Venezuela rules themselves however they want to? What do you expect to happen?
Well, maybe somebody will say, let's go to the barrio that's on the west side of Caracas and build a child care center. And we'll have Secretary Rubio show up to dedicate the child care center. In the meantime, what else are we doing? Doesn't make any difference. I don't want to sound too cynical, but we got to be realistic. It's all nonsense. It's just crap.
Yeah, and I hope that version is what comes out, because if we get this idea that no, we're different. This crew in the White House is different than the Bush or Obama or all these other folks who tried to do it. They just messed it up, but we know how to do it. I hope that's not the case. Although I'm not convinced it's not, because I do think that there's a lot of arrogance that we're different than everybody else and we can do stuff that they failed to do. Do you have any concerns about that?
Well, we've always argued that. That was true in 1965 when we went to Vietnam. It's been true every time we've gone anywhere to do anything. We said that about both world wars. We said it about the Korean conflict at the time. Actually speaking, we did the best we could under the circumstances in Korea, but we recognized the most important thing was to end the war and stop the killing, because we couldn't reverse everything. That was a different time with a different president who understood what he was doing. I think the people in charge right now are in their own world. And it's not just President Trump. It's the entire Washington community. Everyone is living in their own kind of fantasy world where you can print as much money as you want, push the button again, go to the repo window, refund or fund private equity, pay off your donors with all sorts of opportunities to get control of the remains of the prostrate, dying Ukraine, or now pick up whatever is available that could be stolen from Venezuela. This is just the way we do business. It's tragic. It's despicable. It's not the first time in history. Won't be the last. But I think this time we're in a lot of trouble because we don't have the financial wherewithal and the stable economic foundation that we once did. I think that's ultimately going to shut us down.
Now, I want to go down that path. You said a second ago about not just Trump, but it's about the administration and other figures that are in there. Because you gave that anecdote a minute ago. You said that about Trump in the past, about the negotiations, grabbing by the collar and all that. So that would almost imply that that's kind of what the plan was, that he has an idea of what he wants to get done here. So I want to look at a specific aspect of this whole regime change things, which obviously we just executed pretty profoundly in Caracas. Now, Trump ran in both 2016 and in 2024 on no stupid wars, getting out of the wars that we were in, no regime change. By very specifically, he said that repeatedly. Then he gets into office, and several people did say that too. In fact, most recently in October, Tulsi Gabbard went out and said it's American policy. We don't do regime change. We're not in that anymore. Things are a little different now. But I want to take a look here specifically about what Trump said in May of last year in Riyadh, to where he really kind of threw a lot of cold water on all the efforts of the past and shown how he was going to be different. Watch this.
The gleaming marvels of Riyadh and Abu Dhabi were not created by the so-called nation builders, neocons, or liberal nonprofits like those who spent trillions and trillions of dollars failing to develop Kabul, Baghdad, so many other cities. Instead, the birth of a modern Middle East has been brought by the people of the region themselves, the people that are right here, the people that have lived here all their lives, developing your own sovereign countries, pursuing your own unique visions and charting your own destinies in your own way. It's really incredible what you've done. In the end, the so-called nation builders wrecked far more nations than they built, and the interventionists were intervening in complex societies that they did not even understand themselves. They told you how to do it, but they had no idea how to do it themselves. Peace, prosperity, and progress ultimately came not from a radical rejection of your heritage, but rather from embracing your national traditions and embracing that same heritage that you love so dearly.
So, which Trump should we believe? The one who was saying that back then, the one who said in the election campaign that no more regime change, or the one that's now bragging about stealing the Ukrainian oil or the Venezuelan oil?
Well, I think you have to listen carefully to what he says. First of all, the portions that are about liberal interventionism and the nonprofits, which are scams, and many of which are CIA fronts and so forth, all of that failed. All of the changes designed to fundamentally alter these societies, their values, their way of life, and so forth, of course that failed. But now it seems as though he's turning to this billionaire class of vulture capitalists who somehow or another are going to bring prosperity, goodwill, and hope to the rest of the world. And that's what he represents, the billionaire vulture capitalists, the financial capitalists that surround him in the White House, the financial capitalists that run Washington right now. In other words, you're not talking about Andrew Carnegie or J.D. Rockefeller or the people that built railroads, the people that built steel factories, the people that created businesses, Edison and so forth. We're not talking about people like that. We're talking about financial capitalists. They don't build anything. They manipulate money. And in the process of manipulating money and collecting transaction fees, they don't give a damn about the people whose businesses they buy, subsequently dissect, divide up amongst themselves and resell at great profit. These are the people that are running the show in Washington. So on the one hand, he's telling you the truth about what's happened in the past. Now he's also by implication telling you, yeah, everything's going to change, but none of it's going to be good for anybody except us. And he takes the position that it doesn't matter. The problem with him is that the enrichment of everything takes place in the top 1% to 5% for Donald Trump. That's the problem. The rest of the country gets nothing, profits in no way. And that's why I said the notion that somehow or another the Venezuelan people are going to awaken to a new dawn that we're going to provide to them is absurd. Instead, what you're going to get is the other scenario. They're not going to get anything except what we decide to give them, and it'll come in the form of a little child care center that Marco Rubio dedicates. That's the sort of nonsense we're dealing with. Now, the problem is this. You can't just print money in perpetuity. And they've now adopted the position that says, oh, yes, we can. Just watch us. We're going to do that. There are too many forces in the world operating against us. There are too many people outside the United States that now know we're a dangerous, infected being as a nation state from the financial economic standpoint. People are moving away from us. People are doing business in yuan, business in other currencies. They don't want to do business with the United States if they can avoid it. If they have to, they'll do it, but they don't want to do business in dollars anymore. And so with each passing day, fewer and fewer people are doing business in dollars. We're on the road to isolation. It's funny, people that talk about isolationism Isolationism historically in the United States was about staying out of other people's wars. It had nothing to do with business or commerce. But we're moving down a road that's going to isolate us from the supply chains, which are migrating in the direction of China and away from us. These are the things that we should be focused on, but we're not, because for the moment, we're going to use our military power as we see fit to pursue our agenda. Now, the rest of that equation, though, consists of the following. At some point, China, Russia, and potentially other countries are going to say, now that's enough. We don't know when that point is going to be reached or how it will be reached. But we do know that in light of this most recent event in the Atlantic Ocean with the empty oil tanker that we decided we had to own or steal or whatever, and sent the U.S. Coast Guard out to capture it. Now the Russians are sending nuclear submarines and surface combatants into the Atlantic and headed for Venezuela. That's a bad thing. In fact, that's the opposite of what President Trump says he wants. He wants everybody who is not American out of the Western Hemisphere. But in reality, he seems to be creating conditions where we're likely to see the very thing we don't want. The people need to stop and consider for a second, Dan. When we went through the Cuban Missile Crisis, we quarantined Cuba, and you heard Secretary Rubio use that term for Venezuela. They don't like to say embargo. They don't like to say naval blockade, so they say quarantine, remember?
Yeah.
And, we quarantined Cuba for a very good reason. There were theater ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads aimed at the United States sitting on the ground in Cuba. Now stop and consider that. That justified a massive military response to what was happening in Cuba. And the Russians understood that. And ultimately, the Russians wisely withdrew. We made an agreement with them that we would remove similar missiles from Turkey, which were aimed at Russia. Very wise and intelligent thing for us to do. We've thrown all of that rationality out of the window. We are focusing on Venezuela for a whole range of reasons. I mean, the administration's got a list of these things. It's not just oil. It's not just rare earths. It's not just drugs. There are all sorts of things driving this. But what we're losing sight of is this notion that Venezuela, whatever it is no threat to us. So the justification for the massive use of military power to do all of the things we're doing isn't there. So set aside whether or not it's legal, because nobody cares. It's irrelevant. Let's look at the rationality of this whole thing. The strategic rationale doesn't make sense. We can deal with all of the issues that are on this long list without employing vast quantities of military power. It's not necessary.
It's not necessary, but as you say, that it's pushing people back in a direction that is antithetical to our medium and long-term interest, I believe. And all the things that happened in Venezuela with the snatch and grab and all the things we're doing with this taking with this oil, that's all bad. But what, in my view, makes it worse is the reaction this is getting and the cheerleading this is getting within the Republican Party. And far from calling out the president, far from saying, hey, this is going in a direction we don't want to go. Like you just said, there's a better way to accomplish our objectives and to increase the capabilities of the United States than this path. Here it is. Instead, they're doing, more of that. Here is Rep. Andy Ogles actually saying, you know what? We are the biggest guy on the block.
It's important that we have a stake in Greenland, that they are quite frankly a protectorate of the United States and not, they've been in participation or a relationship with Denmark. That needs to end. Denmark, we have spilt more blood. The United States of America has spilt more blood protecting Greenland than the Danes have. We have a greater vested interest in Greenland than, geographically speaking, than the Denmark, the Danes have. And so when you look at the Monroe Doctrine, when you look at the Western Hemisphere, we are the dominant predator, quite frankly, force in the Western Hemisphere. And that speaks to Venezuela, where I'll take odds with Senator Paul, my friend, quite frankly, is that, you had a dictator who was poisoning and killing Americans. And the president of the United States has sent a clear message. If you were complicit in killing Americans, we are going to come for you.
Okay, I'm going to get to that last part he said there in a minute. If you're doing drugs and harming America, we're coming after you. But I want to focus in on that first part there. He outright said, not that we're the dominant military power, but we're the dominant military predator. And of course, that was all in the ideas, not just in the Venezuela, but also in telling Europe, our allies, that if we see that we want over there in Greenland, yeah, we'll take that too, and we're the predator. What does that tell the rest of the world, Doug? Allies and adversaries alike?
Well, I think it's an unambiguous signal that, quite frankly, we don't respect anyone's national sovereignty if it's inconvenient for us to do so. If we find it convenient to seize something, whether it's property that is owned by another country or private property owned by persons who may or may not be Americans, whatever it turns out to be, territory and otherwise, we're simply going to act in what we think is our own best national interest. Now, I think this is very important, because if you're a European and you have been deluding yourselves all these years to believe that the United States is an altruistic power that commits armed forces to the ground in Europe to help the Europeans protect themselves against external threats, well, then you'd better wake up and discover that no, that's not the case. The United States has reasons for being in Europe that have nothing to do with your interests at all. And perhaps you may want to rethink your relationship with America. Now, you know my position. I think the best thing for the Europeans would have been for us to Europeanize NATO and gradually disengage, certainly after 1992-93. There was no reason for us to stay and maintain these large troop deployments. Okay, that wasn't popular. We didn't want to leave. That we viewed Europe then privately as part of our greater global empire. Well, now the Europeans need to ask the question, do we really want these people inside our country any longer? I think the Koreans and the Japanese have already answered this question. They'd like us to leave. The Koreans have said so privately to us. They want us out. We need to get out. The Japanese haven't said it yet. They're being polite, and they're going to probably milk us for whatever benefits they can get for their own military power. But at some point, they're going to say enough, and I think that's close. So we need to get out of a number of these places for those reasons. But it would also be nice for us to leave before we're thrown out. All I think we're doing at this point is guaranteeing that we will be thrown out. Now, if we go to this Greenland thing, what that man doesn't understand is that certainly since 1945, we've dominated the strategic high ground in Alaska, Canada, Greenland, Norway, all the way to the borders with Russia. I mean, what does the man think we're doing? You know, why did we build submarines to sail under the Arctic ice packs? He doesn't seem to understand that we were the first to successfully sail under all of these ice packs with our submarines. We are a dominant maritime power in the Western Hemisphere, and certainly in the Arctic, and have been for a very long time. So the notion that we have to suddenly take ownership, physical ownership of Greenland to be strategically safe and secure is absurd. And Denmark is a small nation. You know, I mean, historically, you can make the argument that all of the Germanic countries, Scandinavia, the Netherlands, all should have long since been coalesced into a greater Germany. Everybody will be shocked. Oh, that's terrible. But that's probably what should have happened historically in Europe. Europe is too fragmented. It consists of little tribal entities that have essentially masqueraded as viable states. They're not. So there has to be a certain amount of cross-border integration and coalescing go on in Europe. Well, it hasn't happened. Maybe once we get out, we'll see some of that occur. There was always an argument that you needed to bring like peoples together into a larger entity, whether they were Slavs or Germanic or something else. It was a matter of security and well-being. Well, it didn't happen. And it was convenient for us that they remained small, divided, and incapable. And guess what? They are small, divided, and incapable. We've succeeded. The question is, what will they do now? And I think President Trump is simply helping them to make some tough decisions. And those tough decisions are going to be made over the next few years.
Now, I want to look at a couple of different aspects of this situation here. One, on the physical capacity of the U.S. to be this predator that Oogles was talking about. And then number two, I guess the moral / legal argument that many people still use as what they think the world should be like or what they want the world to be like. First of all, on the capability. At the end of that statement there, Representative Oogles, I just played here, said, this is about the drugs. This is about keeping America safe. And anybody who comes out against the United States, you can be guaranteed that Trump's going to take them out. Now, the situation with Venezuela, as we've said many times, primarily most of the drugs they make actually end up going to Europe, and very few come to the United States. But okay, whatever, we'll just take their argument at face value on that for the moment. But then everybody has said in conjunction with that, but the biggest violator is Colombia, because that's where the fentanyl comes in, which is the biggest killer in the United States. And of course, Trump said that the president of Venezuela, of Colombia, better watch his ass, and he could be next and all that, until he posts this last night when President Trump says, it was a great honor to speak with the president of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, who called to explain the situation of drugs and other disagreements we have had. I appreciate his call and tone and look forward to meeting him in the near future. Arrangements are being made between Secretary of State Marco Rubio and their foreign minister. The meeting will take place in the White House in Colombia. So everything, all that he said about that, okay, everything's cool now. He's going to come over. Well, unless something magically happened that all these drugs stopped, nothing should have caused President Trump to say that. If lion's share of all the illegal drugs came from Colombia, this makes it look pretty much like, yeah, it's really not that. So one has to wonder, and by the way, the New York Times published this piece, I think it's today, that said that, by the way, it was Trump that initiated that call. And I wonder, and I want your view on this, going in and having this snatch and grab against Maduro is one thing. And there's evidence that we had a double agent inside, and a lot of things went our way. But the idea that we can use military power against Colombia, I think is a very, very different thing, especially with this roughly 18,000 people we have in the area right now. Do you think that there's a possibility that Trump realizes that we're not really this 800-pound gorilla and we can do anything that we want at no cost, and that we really can't go in to have a war with Colombia without great cost to us? What do you think?
First of all, we need to understand something. The CIA has a major role to play in all this drug trafficking, and always has. I don't know all of the details, but you can talk to John Kiriakou and a host of other people, and they will tell you how deeply involved the CIA is in drug trafficking. So when you start talking about stopping it, you probably ought to start at home with the Central Intelligence Agency. If you're a Russian or you're Chinese, you know that the CIA is subsidizing and pushing heroin in great quantities from Afghanistan into Central Asia. And that heroin finds its way now into China as well as into Russia. It's an enormous problem for them, as well as into Eastern Europe and Turkey. So we are heavily engaged in inflicting enormous damage on others with the use of drugs. I think we have to understand that as far as Colombia is concerned, what Trump really wants is somebody to say, yes, sir, we'll do whatever you want. And I think that's probably what the president of Colombia said privately. What do you want us to do? And I think Trump is satisfied with that. He's satisfied with somebody taking the oath of allegiance to him. That's the way he thinks. If you know how to flatter his ego, if you know how to make him feel important, reinforce his view of himself and the world that he lives in, I think you can get a long way. So it's not a question, does he suddenly recognize limitations to his power? No, I don't think so. I think he feels his power is almost limitless. By the way, I really wish that Republican, instead of talking about international affairs about which he and most of his colleagues know absolutely nothing, he ought to stand behind Kristi Noem and the Department of Homeland Security and the terrible outcry against ICE. I'm tired of hearing about ICE agents or terrorists and all this. It's crap. We need to enforce federal law. Congress needs to enforce federal law. They need to get behind federal law enforcement. If we don't do that, the country we have will go out of existence. It won't make any difference what happens in Venezuela or China or Iran or Israel or anywhere else. But the people on the Hill, I think they have other interests, and they don't seem to be very focused on what's really important to Americans.